Okay, so we're holding here in Torah Ches, Likutei Moharan. And this is a very, very interesting Torah. It's quite long. So we're going to see how much of it we get through today. But he starts, now this is on, in the old Likutei Moharans, it's on page Ches. On page Tes, sorry. Tes Amud Aleph. And it's at the bottom left corner. It says there, Isi, this is a quote from Zechariah. It says, Re'isi, I looked, I was having a vision. And I saw a menorah zuhav, I saw a menorah of gold. A zuhav killer, it was completely of gold. The goyla al rosha, and it had a bowl on top of the menorah. So he's going to explain the significance of this. He starts with saying, Hinai, Yukar Genichai Venia Me'ish Yisrael. The moaning and the groaning, or the sighing of Ayit is very special, it's very precious. Because that itself is what fills our lacks, or things that we need. So since you have to wonder, like it's interesting, like one of the main symptoms of anxiety is the sighing, right? You know that someone's an anxious person when a lot of times, you're speaking to them and they go, oh, right? It's a symptom of anxiety. It's a symptom of stress. It's a symptom of difficulties, right? But Rebbe Nachman's telling us it's not just a symptom of it. It's actually the relief of it, right? He's saying that the sighing itself relieves the person of those difficulties that he has. And he's going to explain on a deeper level, on a Kabbalistic level, how this works. But even on a simple level, right? We know that breathing has so much to do with our well-being. And if anyone if anyone ever feels anxious, one of the best remedies for anxiety is just literally just sitting down in a quiet place and just doing some deep breathing, right? Which is also the start of any meditation, right? To get into the state to be able to do any sorts of meditations, the first step is to focus that breathing. That breathing actually changes the chemicals in the brain, right? If someone breathes slowly and calmly and takes deep breaths, right? That itself makes the person feel better. But even on a deeper level, right? So that sighing, when a person sighs, when a person, right, when he's in an anxious situation, that itself is his body trying to regulate the breathing and trying to relieve that anxiety, which anxiety is a discomfort which many people feel in the chest or in the stomach, right? And that's relieved to a certain extent by the deep breathing. Nachman is going to say that even on a deeper level, on a Kabbalistic level, the very act of sighing when one has difficulties is in itself the remedy for those difficulties. And it's like the person has a certain Riyach HaKodesh to a certain extent that he knows, or he is instinctively aware that this is what he needs to do when he's having difficulties, because this is what's going to take the difficulties away. So he explains, that through the idea of breathing, which is breathing is the breath of life, right? Breathing is essential to all of our processes, right? All the cells in the body need oxygen. And when we breathe in, that oxygen goes into the lungs, and the lungs then have these alveoli, these little capillaries, which pass that what's it called? That oxygen into the bloodstream, and it passes into all the organs. It's essential for life. But so too, breath is the essence of life on a deeper level. That Hashem created the world with breath, as he says here. He says that with this idea of breath, Sheiriyah Chaim, which is breath of life, Nivra Ho'ilam, that's what Hashem used to create the world. Moshe Kusiv, as it says in the Pusik, in Tehillim, V'riyach Piv Kol Tzavuam, that he created all of his armies, all of his hosts, all of the angels, which really means all of the worlds, right? Because obviously the angels are worlds that are higher than our world. Everything was created through breath. And remember that breathing is the first step to speaking, right? Because we know that in other places we have Hashem create the world with dibur, with speech. And the idea is going to be that in order to speak, you have to breathe. There has to be the air that passes through your voice box. right? Then in your voice box, it turns from just air into a sound, into a and then in your mouth is where it manifests into the different oisias, as we spoke about, I think, in yesterday's shir. Yeah, yesterday's shir. So we have this concept that the breath is the start of everything. Because in order for Hashem to create the world with dibber, kiviyuchel, he first has to breathe kiviyuchel. Obviously, he doesn't have a physical body. We're talking about in a spiritual sense, right? And then it comes now the level of breathing. It passes into kol, passes into that simple voice, that simple which emanates from the voice box, and then it passes into actual speech. So breath is the start of all of creation. And then he says, "V'chidashu olam yegam kan b'chinas hariach." And the chiddush of the world, the ischachus of the world, the constant ischachus of the world. He means really here on two levels, because the ischachus of the world is happening constantly. So this idea of ata mechaya is kilam, Hashem is constantly mechaya the entire world, is also through this kaviyuchel, through this manifestation of breath, which Hashem is manifesting. And also the chiddush of the olam, which is going to happen, L'osad Luva, when Mashiach comes, where the world is going to transform into a new form, is also going to be through the bechina of breath. Says like it says in the Pusik, T'shalach richacha yivarayin, v'sachadish pnayu adoma. You sent forth your riach, you sent forth your breath, in reference to Hashem. Yivarayin, you created them, you created all of the worlds. And also with that same breath, v'techadish pnayu adoma, you'll be mechadish, constantly you'll be mechadish the world with that same union of breath. And breath is also the very life force of the human being. That the very life force of the person is a neshima, is the breath. Which goes like it says in the Pusik, and this is, he quotes here from Bereshis, V'yifbach bo'ap of nishmas chaim. Hashem breathed into the udam a breath of life. So the breath is what Hashem instilled into the human body to give it life. And then breath is what allows it to continue our lives. As he says, which goes to Kosha Omri Chachom, like the Chachom said, like Chazal said, I skipped, sorry. It says, Vipach v'ap of nishmas chaim, Hashem breathed into Udam's mouth a breath of life, or into Udam's nose a breath of life. It also says, Kol asher nishmas riach chaim ba'apov, it says everything that has the breath of life within its nose. So you see this concept that the breath is the very essence of life. And like the Chachomim said, Im tachser haneshima tachser hachayim. It's very simple. If you lack breath, you lack life. When a person stops breathing, then most likely, unless you can get him breathing again or put him on a breathing machine, right, the chashulam person could die. But also it comes out that the way we breathe affects the quality of our life also, right? The person who breathes deeply and he's getting oxygen to his entire body, then he's able to be healthy. If a person breathes in short, quick breaths and doesn't breathe properly, that can actually affect his physical health, his emotional health, his spiritual health, mental health, right? So breath is very essential for us to be able to live. And he says nimtza, so it comes out, ki ikar chiyas kol hadvarim, that the ikar life force of all things that exist, is breath. Because there's also this idea. Sometimes you have stories of tzaddikim like this, and a person can sometimes have this with very deep meditations. You can get to a certain type of a level where you actually see things breathing, in the sense even inanimate objects, right? You can get to a level where I don't know if it's an illusion of some sort, or if it's or what I'm inclined to think is that you see the pnimius adover, you actually see physical objects pulsing and breathing. You see the life force in everything, because there is that breath of life in everything, even in inanimate objects. Of course, they don't breathe scientifically, right? Scientists aren't going to see oxygen emanating from a table or from a computer, right? But in a spiritual sense, everything is breathing and everything is alive in a certain sense. So he says, when there's a lack in anything, that chasurin, that thing has, that disadvantage or lack that thing has, as a result of a chasurin in the life force of that thing. So take like a person. If a person's ill physically, chas v'shulam, right? Then the idea is that the person's life force is lacking in a sense, and that we can understand. But even on a deeper level, even when a person has a chasurin in anything else, a person lacks money, or he didn't have children, or he wants to get married, or whatever it is, right? Any lack the person has is a result of a spiritual lack. It's something that's missing in that spiritual life force that that person has. Which is why you have the Zohar Kodesh says close to the end, in the end of Devurim, I think it's one of the last pages in the Zohar Kodesh. He says over there that there's a famous statement in Chazal. The Chazal say, "Toiv min haroifim leGehenna," that even the best doctors go to Gehenna, right? And the Gemara, this is mentioned in the Gemara, but in the Gemara there's no elaboration on what that exactly means. What exactly the doctor do wrong that he deserves Gehenna, right? The Zohar over there explains that the problem is that the doctor looks at a person's illness and tries to cure that physical body's illness with medicines. And not to say that that doesn't have value, because you can do that, but you're not addressing the root of the problem, because the root of the problem is a spiritual problem. The root of everything is a spiritual problem. So because of that, the doctor can only do so much. He can cure that physical illness, perhaps, right? Depends what the illness is. Some illnesses they can, some illnesses they can't. But even if he does cure that physical illness, he hasn't treated the root of the problem, and then that root of the problem will manifest, chas v'shulam, as a different illness or a different tzar or a different suffering for the person. So the main thing to do is to focus on that spiritual lack, the lack of chiyas, right? And this is why you have in the Pidyon Nefesh of the Rashash, the whole idea of the Pidyon Nefesh basically is to refresh that riach, to refresh that spiritual chiyas in the person by bringing in new riach, a new chiyas into that person, which should help him with his problems, whatever those problems may be, right? But what Rav Nachman's saying here, it has very much to do with breathing too. So just the very idea of focusing on your breath and trying to breathe differently can bring all kinds of bruchas and hashpos into the person's life. So he says, right? So let's see just the last line again. If there's anything that a person is lacking, that chasurin, that lack, is because there's a imperfection in his chiyas, in his life force. Which is that breath of life. Because the riach, that breath, is what's mekayim, the person or anything, right? And because of that, if anything or any person has a lack, then that's because there's that riach is lacking. And the idea of sighing, it's the idea of drawing out the breath, right? Right? It's the idea of drawing out the breath. And drawing out the breath is a erech hapayim, because if you think about erech hapayim, we translate it as, that Hashem is long suffering. That's how I think article translates it that way, which means that he's patient with us. But the literal translation, erech hapayim, is long apayim. Apayim could mean face, but usually means nose, right? Because I'll say that the face is called apayim, or something's called punim, right? But sometimes you see apayim means face, is because the nose is the ikar of the face. Then you have there's some Chassidish people, Chassidish groups, Chassidish Rebbes, who are careful not to look in the mirror, right? I mean, al pi Shulchan Aruch, it's mashma, a man shouldn't look in the mirror because what's it called? Because the Zohar says that I think the Gemara says that it's what's it called? That it's loy silboish, that it's being like a lady, because ladies are the ones that care about their appearance so much. Men shouldn't, right? So there's those that say, and many say, and many people today aren't careful about not looking in the mirror, because nowadays everyone cares about their appearance. It's not like it used to be once upon a time. So I'm not saying it's usher to look in the mirror, but there are people who have a minhag not to look in the mirror. I remember one time the Baal Baruch was talking about this, and he was saying there was a certain Rebbe, I can't remember which Rebbe he said. He said there was a certain Rebbe that when he looked in the mirror, he used to cover his nose. He said that if the nose is the ikar of the face and you're covering your nose, so then you're not actually looking at your face, right? But al kapunim, but the idea of erech hapayim is the idea of a lengthening in the nose. So that's a long nose, right? What it means is long breath, right? So erech apayim, and erech apayim, we know is Hashem's midah of having rachmanas on us, being patient with us. So and these two things are linked, spiritually linked. So therefore, the very idea of breathing deep breaths itself is a segila for Hashem to be mashpia more toiv to us and to be more patient with us. Right. So someone says right. So someone said here, someone sent me over here a chat that when I take deep breaths, I'm not angry anymore. Right. It's very effective. It's very effective, and the more meditationally it's done, right? You could even taking 3 deep breaths, you'll feel different, right? But if you take like 10 minutes of deep breaths, just go in a quiet room, just sit down in a relaxed position, just take some deep breaths. It'll literally change your the entire way you're feeling. It's like very effective, and so I recommend it very much for anyone who struggles with powerful emotions, anger, anxiety, fear, right? Any of these things. The deep breathing is very helpful for that. Yeah. So anyway, so it's a segila for erech apayim. It's a segila for Hashem to treat us kindly. So he says erech apayim, the haine, which is marich richai, which is the idea of lengthening the breath, breathing deeply. Valkain kishe misanach al chasurin. When a person has a chasurin, something that he's missing, doesn't have money, or whatever the problem may be, he's ill, and he just thinks about it. He's just like, right? That itself is a refiah, and that itself is a segila for that problem to go away. So he says, a person sighs about a difficulty that he has, and he draws out his breath, extends his breath. He's mamshech, he brings into himself breath of life into that thing that he's missing. Kika chasurin, he is talkis hariach chaim canal. Because the main reason why he has a problem, like we mentioned, is because he's missing some of that life force. Al kail de ha through the sighing itself, mashna chasurin, he works on solving the problem just by breathing deeply. This is like why I love Reb Nachman, right? Because who else ever says things like this, right? Where do you ever see this in any other cipher? These kinds of very interesting connections and very practical advice. Oh, Reb Nissim, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, trying to squeeze it in because I've got between Mincha and Marv, so I'm in shul right now.
Okay, yeah, I see you're in shul.
And I'm shaliach tzibur, so.
Oh, okay. All right, okay, yeah. So enjoy however much of it you can.
Yeah, that's what I got my sefer with me, So.
Mm-hmm. We're holding, we're holding now. We're holding in Torah Ches, and we just started section base, section bet.
Base, okay. Ach, me'ayim mekablim.
So he says, ach, ma'ayin mekablim riachayim. So where does this riachayim come from, right? So we already said that there's this idea of deep breathing in general as bringing in that riachayim. But now he says there's a way to get even more of it. And he says, da she'ikar riachayim mekablim hatzadik v'harav shebedor. Very interesting. You can get life force by connecting to a tzaddik, and by connecting to a holy person in the generation. That itself can be a breath of fresh air, so to speak, to give you some of that life force that you need. And he says, why is this? How does a tzaddik get that breath of life to be able to inspire to others? Because he says, in the Torah is where the main essence of this life force is. Like it says in the Pusik, you have at the very beginning of Sefer Breishis, you have the idea that what's it called? That you have that, the way that we learn the first few psukim of Sefer Breishis is that, well, rather the second pusik where it says the earth was toihi, which is chaos, and voihi, which is translated as void, right? So the concept is that the idea of toihi is chaos. So that's the idea of the Shviris Sekayim, the idea of that we have, that at the beginning when Hashem first created the spheres, he created them intentionally in a way that they should break, then that breaking of the spheres cause them to fall out of Atzilus, right? And then Boihi is already the tikkun. Boihi is the idea of that shir kind of being repaired, because like the Sefer of Habahir tells us that Boihi is the words boy he, it is within it. The original spheres couldn't hold the light of Hashem that was being mashpia into them, so they had their shvira. And then the tikkun to that is that they were made in a different way. They were able to hold that light, right? And now the whole system is working properly. And then it says, right? And then it says there was a darkness. There's a darkness on the deep, which represents the idea that even after the tikkun, after we brought those spheres back up to Atzilus, there remained aspects of them in the lower worlds, which is the klippus, and right, and then it says v'riach Elokim marcheves amayim, that riach of Hashem, that life force of Hashem, was hovering over the water. So the idea that we have over there is that there's a life force that remains within those klippus in order to allow the worlds to exist, right? If all that life force would disappear, then all the worlds would disappear. And our goal is to use the things in the physical world in a productive way, in a Yerushalayim type of a way, in order that we can then elevate those nitzaitzes of Kedusha, those sparks of Kedusha, which is the Riach Elokim Marchefes Lapnei Hamayim. He says, the Arizal says that the word Marchefes is mes, or dead, right? Met, and Repach. Repach is 288. Those are the 288 sparks, which are the life force of all the lower worlds. So you have this idea that death, those klippas which are death, have a certain sustenance, and our physical world, which is essentially klippa in that sense, right? It has a sustenance to this idea of these repach netzoitzes, these 288 netzoitzes of Kedusha, these sparks of Kedusha, which give life to the worlds. So this is the life force of the worlds itself. And he says over here that it's bechinas Torah, because the Torah is the life force of the worlds, as we know. The Chazal tell us that if there was a second that Torah wouldn't be learned anywhere on the planet, then the world would disappear, right? So the idea is that those netzoitzes, that life force, is in and of itself the Torah. So he says, so he says, he had Torah, this is the Torah. Vatzadikim, devaikim b'Torah, and the tzadikim are attached to Torah. Right, tzaddikim by definition, a tzaddik isn't a tzaddik because his father was a Rebbe, right? That's a mistake that many people make nowadays. A tzaddik is a tzaddik because he's duvik to the Torah. Of course, there's yichus and chesuvas and so on, but the yichus and the chesuvas is just one little nikida. That's not going to save a person in his life, right? A person needs to have that connection to Torah. So a tzaddik is someone who's attached to Torah. Valkain ikar hariyah chaim hi etzlam. That's why the tzaddikim are attached to the Torah on a more regular basis than an average person. Therefore, they have more of that life force within themselves. When a person is attached to a tzaddik, and the Rav, the Rebbe of the generation, and when that person sighs and extends his breath, he doesn't only get that breath, that air that's in the room around him, he also gets some of that breath, some of that riach, some of that life force from the tzaddik he's attached to. Because remember, we have this idea. The reason why Atzilus is called Atzilus is because Atzilus means, it comes from the word Eitzel, which means beside. So in spirituality, right, there's a concept of being close even if you're far apart, right? Because in Atzilus, what's it called? The Zohar says that the entire Atzilus couldn't hold a single mustard seed, right? And the idea is that it's a completely spiritual oilam, has no physical component to it whatsoever. And yet it's a tremendously huge oilam. The entire Eitz Chaim is about Atzilus, right? And so many different Sifrei Kabbalah, which would take years and years and years and years to learn. So the idea is that in spirituality, closeness is not determined by physical distance. If you love someone, you're very connected to someone in a very deep way, you're always close to them, wherever they are, right? Whether they're in this world or the next, or wherever they might be, right? So the idea is that if you're attached to a tzaddik, and attached to tzaddik doesn't mean that you follow him around everywhere, right? It doesn't mean that it's like he's holding you by the leash. It means you're attached to that tzaddik. So even when you're in another country, even when you're, wherever you are, whatever you are, you're attached to that tzaddik. So when you breathe in, not only do you gain the air from the room around you, but you gain some of that riyach chaim that the tzaddik is mashpia. So he says, Shehiduvik b'Torah, and that tzaddik is attached to the Torah. Shema riyach. That's the where that life force, that riyach comes from. V'zei shenikra tzaddik, and that's why tzaddik is called. He quotes from Bamidbar, Ish asher riyach boy, a person that has a riyach within him. The tzaddik is full of riyach. He's full of this life breath of life. Sheidai laloich neged richa shekol echad ve'echad. And Rashi over there explains, what does it mean, asher riyach boy? What does it mean that tzaddik is someone that riyach is within him? He knows how to approach the riyach of each and every individual. So the simple pshat in Rashi is just that he's intuitive. That's what Rashi means. So he knows with what approach he can approach one person, with what approach he needs to approach a different person, right? Not every person can handle the same type of, for one person, if the tzaddik criticizes him and tells him he's doing something wrong, the person will be makabel and he'll try to change. A different person will only make him angry, he'll only leave the shul, right? You have people like this that tell them, the Rav tells them something they don't like and they leave the shul. Okay, I'm not davening here anymore. Right, so a real tzaddik is someone that knows how to answer each person according to his nature. That's a simple pshat in Rashi. But the way that Reb Nachman's learning it is on a deeper level. He's saying that it means that he's connected to that riyach and each and every one of the people that are connected to him, because his riyach is mashpia to all of his talmidim and all of his chasidim. That's the idea. Ki tzaddik mamshich mashlim riyach chaim shel kol echad ve'echad. Kanal. The tzaddik is mashlim. He brings a completion and perfection to that life force that each and every person has. B'zei bechinas, and this is the bechina where it says of this idea that it talks about in Bruchas. I've given them advice. Riach tzefoinis amnasheves bekinner shel Dovid. Right? It says that the Gemara over there asks, how could Dovid the Melech know what time Chatzos was? Because it says that he woke up for Chatzos, right, for Tikkun Chatzos. And then it says, well, how did he know when Chatzos was? There wasn't alarm clocks in those days, right? And the Gemara asks, even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know. Then the Gemara says maybe Moshe Rabbeinu did know, whatever. But the point is that how did David know? So the Gemara says that David the Melech had a harp, and Riach Tzefoinis, north wind, literally, blew on the harp at Chatzos. Apparently, I guess if you want to learn it literally, that it must be that in Yerushalayim, in those days, there was always a north wind blowing at midnight, right? Otherwise, you would have to learn on a spiritual level. See, Rav Nachman doesn't learn it literally. But the idea is that there was this north wind that blew on the harp, and the harp started to play, and that's what woke David up. He had like a spiritual alarm clock, so to speak. So this idea of this north wind blowing on David's harp, which is Riach Tzefoinis, that means the north wind. It explains, Kinder shel David Hoy shel Chomesh Nimen. David HaMelech's kinder, his what's it called? His harp had 5 strings. He gets this from. I just hear some background noise. So I'm just muting everyone. Don't get offended because I don't mean you personally. If you want to say something, you can unmute anytime. Right. So the idea is that so the Zohar says that David's harp had 5 strings. That's what it says. It's not like a regular harp, right? But as it says, it had 5 strings, and he explains that the idea is Keneged Chemish Torah. Reb Nachman says the reason why it's 5 strings is to symbolize the 5 books of the Torah, because the idea is that just like we just said now, that the idea of riach, of breath of life, that energy, is something that comes from the Torah, right? So because of that, and since we're talking about David's harp, that there was this riach, this wind that was blowing to it, that's also related to the 5 books of the Torah. So that's what he says. And then he says, V'riach tzufan shehoisam menasheves, but what was this north wind that was blowing on David's harp? Ki bechinas riach elikim archeves apnai hamayim. This is this idea of this breath of Hashem, or this wind of Hashem that was hovering over the waters, which is the idea of the life force, the sustaining force of all the worlds, which is the idea of breath, right? So So he says, Kiriach Tzufan, this idea of this north wind, he bechinas hariach hatzufin, beliba shel udam. Riach Tzufan, usually Tzufan means north. But Tzufan can also be an expression of something that's hidden, of Tzafun. Yeah, so someone's asking, is the north wind the force of judgment, which is bechinas elikim? Usually, right, it is. And there's a whole vort on that the Rizal says that since Tikkun Chatzos is very much associated with the Chorban Abayis, even though Duva the Melech's time the Bais Mikdash wasn't even built yet, right? So his Tikkun Chatzos wasn't our Tikkun Chatzos, obviously. But the idea, but there is this idea that Chatzos is associated with Din. Even though there's all kinds of different things that it says, it also says that before Chatzos is Din, that when Chatzos comes in, it's Rachamim. Right, but you have this concept that the Tikkun Chatzos is associated with din, being mamtik din, and the reason connects that to the idea of the fact that the north wind was blowing on the harp. But over here we're going to say, like the Nachman's learning, that tzufan doesn't really mean north; it means tzufan, concealed or hidden, right? Because that tzafun, right, which means something that's concealed. So he says this is that riach, that chiyas, which is tzufan b'liba shel udam, it's concealed within the person's heart. Right, which is this idea that we're talking about, this life force of the person, which is associated with breathing. Right, and when a person breathes deeply, like Rebbe Nachman said, then that person is able. The breathing deeply is not just a result of his anxiety. The breathing deeply itself is the salvation from his anxiety, because that breathing deeply fulfills your life force and completes your life force, and then allows and once the life force is fixed, then your problems start getting fixed. Right, so this is all connected, he says. And he says, this is this breath of life. So then he says, he brings from the Gemara in Bava Basra, the Gemara says, Kitzufan Chuser, the north is lacking, literally. In the sense that the Gemara over there, the real context of the Gemara there is the idea that the north is lacking sunlight. Right? Because we have this idea, we know this, right? That in the northern places it's colder because it's lacking sunlight, literally, because you know how it works, because the Earth's axis is not straight, it's tilted somewhat, right? So the north is always going to be further away from the sun, and so therefore it's lacking sunlight and it's colder, right? That's what the Gemara means, pushit pshat. But he's learning over here that since he's learning that sofan means concealed, which means that breath of life which is concealed within the person, and he's saying that and the Gemara says that sofan is chusar, it's lacking. That's this idea that the person, all the person's lackings the person has, it doesn't have health, doesn't have money, doesn't have can't make shaddichim, whatever it is, right? That lack that he has is a lack in his life force, and through deep breathing, person is able to get back that life force, and get back the things that he's lacking. So everyone should really try to practice this as much as possible. Just try to be, don't make yourself crazy, right? Don't get OCD about it, right? But try to focus on your breath as much as you can, and try to breathe slowly and deeply in and out. And you'll see things will change, both on a psychological level and then also on the spiritual level, right? So he says, "V'chasurin he belev," and that chasurin, that lack, is that lack of breath which is within the heart of the person. Like it says in the Pusik in Tehillim, Hashem should give you what your heart asks for. Yimale Hashem kol and Hashem should fill up everything that you ask for. Right? So the idea is going to be that what's really what your heart is asking for is something that has to be filled up. It's a lack in the heart itself. In other words, when a person wants money, he feels he doesn't have enough money to afford, whatever he needs. It's not that he's lacking money. Lacking money is just the external manifestation. It's a symptom. It's not the problem, right? The problem is a problem inside. And so when Hashem fills up that problem in the heart, then all the physical circumstances which he was looking at as the problem, which are actually just a symptom of the problem, those will solve themselves too. It's like I just thought of this mushal now. It's like taking a Tylenol, right? Person's in pain, takes Tylenol. Okay, so it's just tricking yourself, right? Because the pain goes away, but the problem didn't go away, right? So sometimes you need that because sometimes it's hard to deal with the pain. What you really want to do, BMS, is deal with the problem behind it, right? And then you won't have the headache to begin with, or whatever it is, right? So it's the same type of idea, right? The symptom, the things that you think are your problems are actually just the symptoms of the problem. And the problem is actually something that's deeper. So you can treat the symptoms if you want, but then the problem is going to manifest in a different way, right? So the idea is that you have to treat the problem itself, which is this idea of the breath. So he says, "Ve'ikar riach chaim hi belev," and that the main center of that riach of life in the person is in the heart. And the reason is because we have this idea that that like the Zohar tells us that the nefesh, even though all the parts of the neshama are nespashed throughout the entire body, right? But they have centers. So the center of the nefesh is in the liver. The center of the riach is in the heart. The center of the neshama is in the brain, right? That's what the Zohar tells us. Because that the center of the riach is going to be in the heart, and that's why the lungs, which is where the riach, where the air comes in, where the breath comes in, are situated right beside the heart, right? That's the closest organ to the lungs, because of this idea that that riach, that breath, rests within the heart. And he says, and he quotes, like it says in Tikkun Zohar, Kili Shaif, and all the limbs of the person, they all follow the heart, Kimalka, like a king. The Zohar uses this example in many different places for many different things. Basically, the idea is like an army, right? So the king's leading the army, assuming that that's what he's doing, right? So the king is leading, and the entire army is following the king and following the king's directions, right? So in that same sense, all the limbs follow the heart, right? And however the heart is doing, that's how the limbs are doing, right? So the idea is that this riach, which is in the heart, is really the source of everything, and that's what all the limbs and all the problems they have is because of the problem in this riach in the heart. He says, "Kedomer," like it says in the Pusik in Yecheskel, where it says, "Al shayir sham hariach leleches." Yecheskel is talking over there in his vision about the Chayes HaKodesh, and he says that wherever the riach was, that's where the Chayes went. So there's this riach, the spiritual energy, and the Chayes HaKodesh, these Maluchim, are turning and moving based on where that riach is. So that riach is the source of everything. So it's again the same idea that this riach is the source of all of our problems and solutions. Right? So you have to fix that riach in order to fix the problems. As riach, he believes that riach is in the heart. But chesurin, that lack the person has, he is stalkas a riach. That's the idea that there's not enough riach. Some of the riach is missing within the person. Shemakoyim belev. And that's why he said this whole idea about breathing before, right? Because when you breathe, so you're mashlim, you fill up that riach that's lacking. So he says, so he says, right? So he says, "V'chesurin he is talkas hariach shem koyim belev." So the chesurin, that lack, comes from a lack of riach in the heart. Al-kain nirgish is chesurin belev, and that's why a person feels that lack in his heart, right? In the sense that, I mean, anxiety manifests different ways for different people. For many people, it manifests as a tightness in the chest, right? All people take panic attacks or anxiety attacks. They think it's a heart attack that they're having, right? They call emergency, and then they find out it's just emotion, right? But it's literally, that's where it's felt. Why is it felt there? Because that's where the lack is. That thing that's making him anxious, is a lack that's in the heart, right? So he says, when he solves that problem, by bringing in more riach into the person, Neymar then says, Hashem is going to give you what your heart desires. Which is what we talked about. I see that Reb Shlomo asked, this breath is meant from the nose or from the mouth? Are they the same? So it doesn't specify. The way he was talking about before, riach ba'apav is mashma the nose, right? But there is an Indian of breathing with the mouth. There is an Indian of breathing in with the nose and out with the mouth. This is mentioned in Sfurim too, and it's mentioned, I think, also in medical sources. That's like the best way to do deep breathing, is into the nose and out through the mouth. But he doesn't seem to make that distinction here specifically. But anyway, so he says, Valkan Yisrael shehem mekablim ariach chayim ma'atoyra. So then the Yidden who are able to be mekabel, our health pros agree, right? Okay. So the Yidden, which who are makabel that riach from the Torah, and they crew him al Shem Tzufin. So then the Yidden are called, because if Tzufin means that concealed riach that's within the heart, right? Then the Yidden who have the Torah, which the Torah is the source of that life force, right? So the Yidden are also going to be called Tzufin. Like it says, he brings the Pusik in Tehillim, Al Amcho Yerim Yisoid, that the Goyim, the nations, were planning out a secret attack on the Yidden, Bisyatzi, and they were advising each other how to fight Al Tzifainechu, upon your hidden ones, literally, which means the Yidden. So you see, the Yidden are called Tzufin, are called hidden, because Yidden have, Baruch Hashem, sometimes we still have Chesaronis in the Riach, right? But we have a little bit more of that because we're connected to the Torah, which the Torah is that life force itself. Then he says, Ach Reshuim Hadoibrim Al Tzad. Now here, Rav Nachman gets very, very sharp over here, which is interesting because you usually don't see it, because Rav Nachman had a lot of difficulties, a lot of challenges with Rabbunim who were against him. And not only the Misnagdim, which all the Chassidim were dealing with, but he had issues with certain Chassidish Rebbes too, who were very against him. And often he felt very attacked. If you look at Likutei Moharan, Rav Nachman's life, you see how many difficulties he went through. And he mentioned a different Torah, which we learned, I think in Torah Zion, Torah Vov. He mentioned this idea about that you should never judge a tzaddik. And if you see that tzaddikim are fighting with each other, or it seems like they're fighting with each other, it's really higher things that are happening and we can't understand it. That's what he said over there. But over here, he comes out very, very sharp over here in the way you'll see it, you'll judge for yourself. But Derech Agav, it was just because Reb Nachman was ahead of his time. Like we see, like I just mentioned, whoever says Torah is like this, like where have you ever seen a Dvar Torah that tells you about the importance of breathing deeply, right? And Reb Nachman has so many chedishim, so many of the things he says are like things you don't find anywhere else. So there was a lot of Rabbunim that were scared of this new approach almost that Reb Nachman had. So because of that, he had these other Rabbunim were against him, and they made him difficulties because he was so ahead of his time that in those times it sounded crazy. But nowadays, in the situation that we're in, Reb Nachman's Torahs were made literally for our generation. But anyway, so he says over here, Ach Reshuim Hadoivrim Al Tzadik. When you have Reshuim that speak against the Tzaddik, Usak, they speak against the Tzaddik negative things, Begava, Biz, with their Gava, with their haughtiness, and Biz, and they make Bizyoinus, and they make fun of the Tzaddik. Where do they get their Riach to solve their problems? Because it looks like they also do, right? But like you said, that if you need to be attached to a Tzaddik to get the full measure of that Riach, so where do these people get their Riach from? So he says, Achda, you should know, Shesh Rav de Klippa. There's such a thing as a rabbi or a Ruv of Klippa, he says. Right? Okay? this is what I meant. Right? V'hi b'chinas Aisav. And that person is b'chinas Aisav. Like Aisav. When it goes about Aisav, like it says about Aisav, Yeshli Rav. Right? I said Yeshli Rav, which literally means I have a lot, but Rav also means a Ruv, means a rabbi. Right? So there's a bechina of a rabbi that belongs to Aisav. V'hi b'chinas Alife Aisav, and that's a concept of Alife Aisav, of these kings of Aisav, these rulers of Aisav. You have these people that are in positions of power, which come from Aisav. Like the Inkelis translates Alife Aisav, Rav Revai Aisav, so to speak, the way that Rav Nachman's learning it, Rav Revai could just mean the great ones of Aisav. But the way Rav Nachman's learning it means the rabbis of Aisav. Bechinas Harav de Klippa, which is this idea of a Rav, of a Ruv, which comes from Klippa. And the Rishuim, those evil people, they get their Bechinas Riach, they get that life force from their rabbi, which happens to be a Rav from the side of the Klippa. Bechinas Riach Tima, this is the idea of Riach Hatima, of a Riach, of an energy, of a breath, of a life force, but it's coming from Tima. Because Riach Sara, which is the idea of, we also have Riach Sara, which means like a whirlwind or a storm wind, right? So the idea is that you have this kind of riach that comes from a negative place. When Shekusav, like it says, Hein Isav Uchi Ish Suer, the eyes of my brother was a hairy man. So the word Suer means hairy, but it's the same, even though this is with a sin and the other with a samach, but the same as Riach Sara, storm wind, showing that this idea of a stormy wind, of a stormy life force, can come from the side of the klippah. This is very similar, Derech Agav, to what the Zohar says about other religions and about Avodah Zarah. The Zohar says, the Gemara has this question. The Gemara has the question about how can it be that sometimes people daven to avoid the Zorahs and they get what they ask for. Right? So the Gemara's answer is very practical. The Gemara just says, well, Hashem wanted to cure that person anyways. Now he's not going to cure him just because he davened to avoid the Zorah. Hashem does not mean like that. In the sense that avoid the Zorah doesn't really have a koyach, but it happened to be that person is supposed to be healed anyways. That's a very practical sort of way of looking at it, which is probably the way the atheist would look at the fact that we have people that get healed when we daven. And they would also probably say, well, it just happened to be that person got better at that time, right? But the Zohar has a very different word. The Zohar says that it actually works to daven to avoid the Zorah. He says, the Zohar says, because the Zohar says that the avoid the Zorahs are koiches. They have a power. It just happens to be that they're koiches of klippah, right? So it's like sort of, in English they have the expression, what do you call it? Making a deal with the devil or selling your soul to the devil, right? So you have this concept that a person can daven to avoid the Zorah and perform a korban or whatever it is for avodah zarah, and he'll get something from that. It's not wasted time. It's something's actually happening. But what's happening isn't what should be happening, because what should be happening is he should be connected to Hashem instead he's connected to a force of Tima. So that Tima might sustain him to a certain extent and give him somewhat what he needs, but it'll also corrupt him. It'll corrupt his mind and make him like disconnected from Rachnias. Right, so the idea is that you have this concept. So he says the same thing as here. You can get the riach chaim from a tzaddik. If you connect to a tzaddik, you'll get some of that riach when you breathe. But if a person connected to a rav of klippah, then he'll get a bechin of riach hatima. He'll get that life force too, but from the side of tima. So he says, "Ba'al kain hariach shelahem gudol v'takav lefi shu," and it comes out that the strength of that riach that's coming from the Rav of Klippa will be very, very powerful, because it's like we said, it's like a whirlwind or a storm wind. It's very powerful, right? So they're getting even more riach from that than a person would be getting from the tzaddik emes. But the word is that's only lefi shu, it's only temporary. It says k'moy riach sara shehi gudel b'shateh, like a storm wind or a whirlwind, which is very powerful when it's in action. Well, and that's why it says in Tehillim regarding Arusha, regarding evil person, it says there, called Tzoyrav Yafiach Bahem, all of his enemies, he blows them away. In the sense that he has so much of this riach within him, he can blow away his enemies. So he says Yafiach Daika. Specifically, the Pusuk chose the expression of blowing away for a reason. Shem is Gaber Alayim al Bechinas Riach Piv, Shegudel B'Shata, because he's able to actually blow them away with that strength of the riach that he has, which is very powerful, but only for a temporary time. Ach she'ain lo kiyum klal, but it doesn't have any kiyum, it doesn't have any permanence to it. Right, very good question, right? Shlomo asked here, how do we know that we are connected with a tzaddik, so we do not get a timah power? Not so like Shabbos Tzvi, right? You have to daven for siyata d'shmaya, right? I mean, put it this way, like, I guess if you want to connect to a tzaddik, you have to see what kind of person it is. And everyone has a certain type of intuition. Of course, we can always be wrong. And even sometimes the person could be a tzaddik and then could fall from that level too, right? So, So it's very hard. You have to daven for siyata d'shmaya and connect to a roof that you feel is someone who, speaks the proper spiritual ideas and everything he's saying sounds like it's coming from a good place. And be cautious, especially in our generation, right? But yeah, I mean, put it this way: the Breslovers, like I teach Likutei Moharan, and in a sense, I consider myself very connected towards Breslov. I'm not actually a Breslover per se, but the real Breslovers, they just connect to Rebbe Nachman, who's the one that's saying this, and who they're sure is a tzaddik. Like in Breslov, they never appointed another Rebbe after Rebbe Nachman. And since you can connect to someone even who's not alive anymore, right? So they feel very connected to Reb Nachman. Technically, if a person could be connected to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Like whatever, you know. So connect to someone that you're sure is on the level, I guess. But anyway, so he says that this yeah. So he says that this power, that this riach that person has when he connects to the Rav of Tima, it's very powerful. But ach ein lo kiyum klal, it doesn't have any kiyum, it doesn't have any permanence. At the end, it'll totally disappear and no longer exist. Master Gifa v'nishmusa, and it'll actually damage his body and his neshama in the end. You know, it's like I'm just thinking of an analogy to it. It's like chas v'shalom, it's like drugs, right? Let's say someone takes cocaine, right? So he feels all invigorated and powerful, right? It does give him that power for however long it's acting for, right? But then it damages him. It makes the body ill, and it damages the body. Gets addicted. His mind goes crazy. All different problems that could happen, right? So you have this idea that you get a temporary rush, but then that temporary rush doesn't lead to anything good, right? So it's the same type of an idea. It's a very powerful riach that's coming in from the non-tzaddik, right? If it's a very powerful riach that's coming from the non-tzaddik, but it doesn't last long, and it ends up damaging the person as opposed to helping him in the end, which is always with all these things. Like in Kabbalah Masas, you have all these stories of people that try to connect to Shaidim and try to get the Shaidim to give them power. Yeah, very nice, as long as it lasted. But then as soon as the Shed gets sick and tired, and the person ended up in a very bad place or killed. Right, so this is how these things work. I see that Rabbi Yisrael asked, must he have one Rebbe? Is accepted to have more than one Rebbe? You can have more than one Rebbe. It doesn't have to be just one. You can be connected to many different tzaddikim. That's what I try to do. Like officially, I'm connected to Babov, but I try to to be close to all the tzaddikim that I can be close to. It doesn't hurt, right? The more tzaddikim, the better, probably. But it's important to have one derech in the sense that you can have a lot of different rebbes that you learn from, but try to have a consistent derech just for your own well-being and for the family. People aren't totally confused, and you're doing one thing from Bells, and one thing from Lubavitch, and one thing from Baba, and one thing from Sfardim. It becomes a whole chul, and then the kids don't know how to figure that out. So it's good to have a consistent mahalach, but it's good to be connected to a lot of tzaddik. So anyway, so he says here. So in the end, he ends up damaging his body and his neshama through this. So it's like it says in the Pusik and Devurim, he says, "V'mishalem l'soinav al punov v'havidi." Hashem will punish, will pay back, so to speak, mishalem, his enemies, those that hate him, al punov, to their faces, l'havidi, to destroy them. That's the Pusik, and Nachman says the word mishalem, v'mishalem, is this concept of being mishalem. Usually doesn't mean negative, right? So in the Pusik, it's interesting. Mishalem usually means to complete. He will complete. We want to have completion, right? But then over here you have to say that he's completing the soinim. He's completing his enemies by punishing them, right? It means to punish them. So the idea is, so he says, the mishalem is the expression of completing, of filling in that thing that the person was lacking. Kind of b'chinas arichas ariach, because this idea of arichas ariach, the idea of breathing deeply, as we said, which is the idea of connecting to that spiritual energy. V'zehi el punav, he says, and why does it mean? Why does Hashem say he'll pay them back to their face? Ki punav hi b'chinas ariach, because the punav, the face, is a riach. How do we know? Like it says in the Pusik in Yeshaya, Hakuras Pnayim on Sabam, that the what's it called? Their face, right? The recognition of their face will judge them. What does that mean? Ze'achoitem, that means the nose, which you just said, because the nose is the ikar of the face. Shebechinas ariach, which is that idea of breathing, is associated with the nose, right? And he says, like it says, Hashem breathed into Udam's nose a breath of life. And this idea of everything has the breath of life in its nose. So what do you mean? So if Hashem is being misham the chesroinus of these Rishuim who are speaking, who are connected to the Rav who's not a tzaddik, right? So if he's fixing their chesronis, what's the problem? Then he says, ach, ki lahavidi. No, but it says lahavidi to destroy them. Ki af shegudu lefishu. Even though his chesron will be filled temporarily by this Rav of Timothy he's connected to, but at the end it'll only damage him. He says, this is the concept of where you have in the Gemara Yerushalmi in Tanis, he brings that Hashem is erech apayim l'reshurim. Hashem is erech apayim, he's long suffering for the evil, right? For the evil people, which simply would seem, on a simple sense, even to someone who's a rusher, Hashem has erech apayim, Hashem has patience and waits for him to do tshuva. But Rebbe Nachman says, ki ariach hanashima, this idea of this riach and this breath, because erech apayim is erech apayim, a longness of nose, meaning breathing long, extending the breath that come through the nose. But he says, "V'haine marich apay," that Hashem is patient with the tzaddikim, but the guvai dilai, but he'll collect his due in the end, in the sense that, he'll give them a rush for a while, but then he'll take it away. He'll take his due at the end, and then at the end they're gonna regret having been connected to something that's not from Kedusha. It says, Ki af, shelefishu hariach gudel v'takev, even though for temporarily that riach that he gets is great and powerful, this idea of, he has this extra breath from this place he's getting it from. But at the end, guvay dilai, Hashem will collect for him at the end. You'll have to pay back for being connected to that. Valkain, he says, because of that, Yikrum Yisrael are called Aniya Suraro. The Yidden are called the poor and afflicted nation. But Suaro is the same expression as, like we said before, Riach Saro, this storm wind, right? And also associated with Sayir, which is Isav. He says, Kihem Akshav Tachas Mamsheles Isav Ish Sayir, that now, presently, we're under the control, we're under the power of the kingdom of Isav, of Edom, which Isav is Ish Sur. It's this idea of a person that's hairy, which is associated with storm wind, which is associated with this idea of this negative breath. But even so, even in the Gulas, when we're under the rulership of Isav, if we connect to the tzaddikim, mekabel ariyach chayim, a person can be a mekabel ariyach chayim from the tzaddikim, and shleim sachsur, and fulfill his lacks. But tzaddik v'arav de kedusha, by connecting mehat tzaddik, by connecting to the tzaddik and the rav and the Rebbe, which is from the side of kedusha. Okay, so I think we'll stop here because this is sort of like a new topic now, and we're almost over time. So we'll stop here, Bez Hashem, and we'll continue next week. And tomorrow's the shir in Sif Sechaim. So good night, everyone. Kol Tov. My pleasure. Kol Tov.